But today I want to talk about agriculture. And today I want to talk about the EPA and what's going on in regards to what I think is regulatory overkill for sure. Basically, as the administration moved forward with its review, I recommended the President and his advisors pay particularly close attention to the activities of 3 specific agencies when they are determining which proposed regulations will place the greatest burden on agriculture. I am privileged to be the ranking Republican and to serve with the Senator from Michigan, our co-chairman of the committee, Deborah Stabenow. A key component of our nation's economy, I'm talking about agriculture now, and the ability to feed this country in a troubled and hungry world. And we're talking about the agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Agriculture, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, all impacting agriculture. Since fiscal year 2010, 10 new regulations promulgated, that's a fancy word in Washington to say issued, the regulations, by the EPA have accounted for over $23 billion in new costs to the American taxpayer. That's outrageous, and they're just getting started. The EPA has several new proposals, many of which will have immediate negative impacts on the ability of America's farmers and ranchers to continue to produce enough food to feed our communities, our states, our country, and yes, the world. And think of how valuable that is as we look down the road with about 9.3 billion increase in population compared to 6 billion today. We're going to have to double agriculture production. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Why on earth would we want to be doing anything to the farmer and rancher whose job it is to do that? That's beyond me. I'm going to highlight 2 such proposals that many producers have brought to my attention. I just addressed the Commodity Classic in Kansas, and a great band, about 200 farmers attended. Guess what their number 1 concern was? Over-regulation. Regulation that could put them out of business. Oh, they're concerned about the Farm Bill. They're concerned about lending. They're concerned about debt. But first, in only 7 short weeks, the EPA will require farmers who are applying pesticide to kill pests so they can save the crop to obtain a permit under the Clean Water Act, even though that activity is already highly regulated under the federal pesticide law. The President said we don't need regulations that are duplicative. We don't need 2 agencies having a different agreement on 1 regulation. Probably don't even need that regulation because we have very strong regulations under the FIFRA Act that we have right now. Unfortunately, the administration chose a different path, and now estimates suggest that this duplicative regulation will require 365,000 individuals to get a Clean Water Act permit. 365,000 individuals. A requirement that will cost $50 million and require 1 million hours per year to implement, and bottom line, will not add any environmental protection. This layer of red tape will place a huge financial burden on the shoulders of farm families all across the country, as well as state governments responsible for enforcement, while at the same time facing dire budget situations. Last month, John Salazar, a former member of the House of Representatives and newly appointed Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture, stated in his testimony before the House, quote, "It is no secret that states across the country face dire budget situations. Many have had to close state parks, cancel transportation projects, and cut funding to higher education. It is very difficult," said John Salazar from Colorado, "to justify diverting even more resources to manage paperwork for a permit that is duplicative of other regulatory programs and has no appreciable environmental benefits. However, if Colorado's estimates are reflective of the situation in other states, the true cost to states will quickly outstrip EPA's estimates. More than 365,000 individuals, $50 million, and 1 million hours per year to implement on the backs of our farmers and ranchers. Mr. President, these expenses are not just limited to the cost of compliance and enforcement. The April 9th effective date is near. There is still significant confusion and uncertainty about what pesticide applications will fall under these new regulations. This means that farmers and other pesticide applicators may very well find themselves subject to massive penalties On top of the fact that they shouldn't be filling the paperwork out in the first place. If they don't, they could be held responsible for massive penalties for a minor paperwork violation to the tune of, get this, $37,500 per day per violation. Unbelievable. Beyond agency enforcement, they will also now be exposed to the threat of litigation under the Clean Water Citizens Suit provisions. With the volatile nature of agriculture markets and increased demand, these sort of risks and resulting cost are something that producers and the hungry mouths who depend on them simply cannot afford. Next, EPA is undertaking an effort to control particulate matter, this is a favorite of mine, otherwise known as dust. They call it rural fugitive dust. This is a dust off the old 1970s effort to control rural fugitive dust. I remember that. Somebody must have pulled it from the file. This is part of the EPA's review of the PM standard under the Clean Air Act. The agency is currently considering the most stringent regulations on farm dust that have ever been proposed. I finally reached back when they first proposed this, the person that was in charge of promoting, or she was going to promulgate these regulations on rural fugitive dust. And before I could get a word in, finally I reached the person who was in charge. It took me 3 days. And finally, before I get a word in, she says, "Do you realize," at that point I was a congressman, and she said, "Do you realize, Mr. Roberts, that you have a lot of dust out in your country?" I said, "No kidding. I think I think we know that. That's why we have the Great Plains Conservation Program. That's what we have. Each farmer has to have a conservation program if they're going to apply or be applicable to the Farm Bill. And we have the Conservation Reserve Program. We're doing everything we can to control dust, rest assured. Nobody likes that." And I said, what would you have us do to comply with rural fugitive dust? He says, "Well, you know, those grain trucks at harvest, they go up and down gravel roads and they cause a lot of dust." No kidding. And I said, "What would you have us do?" "Well, why don't you send water trucks out at 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 in the afternoon to every community in Kansas that has all those gravel roads where you harvest wheat?" I said, "Great idea. That would be marvelous. Maybe we could get a grant. Today that would be a stimulus grant to small communities in regards to rural areas where we're doing the wheat harvest to, number one, buy the trucks, number two, find the water." Now, that's just how ridiculous this is with rural fugitive dust. To put it simply, this defies common sense. Whether there's cattle kicking up dust in a feedlot in Dodge City, Kansas, or Larned, Kansas, or anywhere in Kansas during harvest, on a hot afternoon on the high plains in June, dust is a naturally occurring event. Standards beyond the current limit would be impossible to meet, particularly in the western portion of the nation where rainfall is often scarce. I don't even know why I'm taking this seriously in regards to that kind of a regulation. In a bipartisan June letter, 23 members of this body wrote a letter to express these concerns to Administrator Jackson, and we said this: "Considering the administration's focus on rural America and rural economic development, a proposal such as this would have a negative effect on those very goals. Common sense requires the EPA to acknowledge that wind blows and so does dust." Now, as we think about EPA's actions impacting agriculture, it is critical to recognize that no one cares more about maintaining a clean environment than the American farmer and rancher. Our producers across the country manage their operations responsibly because of their desire to keep farming and to one day pass along that ranch or field to their sons or daughters or grandchildren if they can. They know firsthand that clean air and water and healthy soil go hand in hand with a healthy economy. Our producers deserve respect and appreciation from EPA, not costly and redundant and unnecessary and, yes, even ridiculous regulation. Let's shift departments now. The Department of Agriculture's Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, that's tough. That's called GIPSA, by the way. That's the acronym. Agriculture's Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, released a proposed rule that would dramatically increase the red tape governing the business relationships surrounding the production and marketing of livestock in the United States. The rule was initially proposed last summer without, Mr. President, the benefit of a meaningful cost-benefit analysis, something we've been trying to get in my legislation, something the executive order should have done. However, the proposal has since received significant criticism from ranchers, industry, members of the Congress alike, now being further evaluated by USDA officials. As written, the proposal would dramatically reduce the consumer's choice. It would increase cost. The proposal exposes packers to liability for use of alternative marketing arrangements and other innovative procurement methods, thereby ultimately depressing the prices received for America's most efficient and successful producers while potentially reducing the quality available to consumers. Further, this proposed rule would actually increase the concentration in the sector as businesses are forced to change their current organizational structure, and you would find an exacerbation of the very issue the rule is allegedly designed to address. Now, for instance, in Kansas, we have a highly successful rancher-owned company made up of individual producers. They own both cattle and shares in the company's processing infrastructure. Under this proposal, many of the individuals of the company may now be prohibited from selling cattle directly to other processors, creating the need for a middleman that would then lower the price the producer would actually receive. If implemented, this so-called GIPSA rule poses a substantial threat to the continued viability of the domestic livestock sector. Now, in Kansas, this industry contributes over $9.5 billion to our economy just in Kansas. With an economic footprint of this magnitude, the GIPSA regulation is a burden that Kansas and many other rural states, many other livestock producers simply can't afford. Let me talk about another agency falling through the President's executive order loophole, and that's the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. As a result of the Dodd-Frank Act, the Regulatory Reform Act, in the financial world, the CFTC is charged with developing dozens of new regulations impacting participants up and down what's called the swaps and futures chain. Now, shouldn't these regulations be held to the same standard of cost-effectiveness and undue burden as others? Well, yes, but no. I talked to Chairman Gansler in my office just a couple of days ago, very nice man, very pleasant. He believes very strongly that the CFTC is exempt from the President's executive order because Congress said it was exempt. I indicated I didn't think so, especially since the CFTC is currently pushing 40-plus rules out the door 1 year with little or no priority. We were told the intent of Dodd-Frank was to reduce systemic risk in the financial marketplace. However, several of CFTC's proposals appear to increase risk management costs on those who do not pose a systemic threat. Now, the CFTC must be mindful that increased costs through high margin and capital requirements on certain segments of the marketplace may decrease a user's ability to use appropriate risk management tools. A rigorous cost-benefit analysis, tailor-made for the CFTC's current situation, dozens of economically significant rules, the potential to negatively impact risk management costs of American businesses, and a simple question needing to be answered. Do the benefits of this proposed regulation, and we're talking about anywhere from 40 to 60 now, in the form of lower systemic risk in our financial system, outweigh the increased cost on businesses? Let me just say something in talking with Chairman Gansler, and again, I really appreciate him coming by the office and talking, and it became obvious to me that with all these regulations, maybe the first one ought to be a definition regulation. What is a swap? Who is a dealer? Hasn't been done yet. So we're going to propose 40 or 39 more regulations, and we haven't even defined who the regulations will affect and what is the subject matter that they're going to regulate. Oh, that's really unbelievable. We're going to have a hearing tomorrow in the Senate Agriculture Committee. Mr. Gansler, Chairman Gansler, will attend and will give his testimony. We're going to be very welcoming him in regards to the committee, but that's something I'm going to answer. Why on earth are you going ahead with 40 regulations and you can't even define who you're going to regulate and what you're going to regulate? No definition. That to me is pretty bad. You got the cart before the horse there. Mr. President, in closing, I want to make 2 points. First, in many rural areas of Kansas and the rest of the country, agriculture is the cornerstone of the economy. Second, in the coming decades, we will be even more reliant on Americans, farmers and ranchers to feed an ever-growing world population. I said that before. We must truly commit to a real and robust, there's a good Senate word, robust review and revocation of any and all unduly burdensome regulations that could inhibit American agriculture's ability to produce the safest, most abundant, and affordable food, feed, and fiber supply in the world. What are we talking about? 9.3 billion people. What are we talking about? The ability for our agriculture, everybody in agriculture, to double our production, all the farmers and ranchers. Why on earth would we want this whole business of regulatory impact, most of which is highly questionable, none of which fits the President's executive order to take a look at a cost-benefit? Why on earth would we do this to the very person whose job it is to feed this country in a troubled world and hungry world? Look at the Mideast in turmoil. Remember that one interview on TV where somebody stuck a microphone and asked one of the protesters in Libya, "What are you protesting for? Democracy?" He says, "No, loaf of bread." Where people are hungry and malnourished, you have no economic opportunity, and you have people who are hungry and they will go and join extremist groups and even on over into terrorism groups. I had the privilege of being the chairman of the Intelligence Committee here in the Senate, and that was one of the big considerations we had in whole areas of the world where people do not have the ability to feed themselves, and they're in a food-deficient area, and it really poses problems for the future of that part of the world. And here yet, we ask our farmers and ranchers to double our ag production in a couple of decades. I don't know how we're going to do this with this regulatory nightmare. Let's hope we wake up soon. And I would hope everybody take a good look at my bill to codify the President's executive order. Give him credit for doing that, but not with all these loopholes which are going to drive us nuts out there in rural and small-town America. I yield back, Mr. President. Thank you.